Hello and welcome to another episode of LABORvision, brought to you by your friends at KDHX, Community Television for St. Louis and for Missouri. I'm your host, John Hickey, and Metro St. Louis and Missouri is facing a series of crises. We've got an unemployment crisis, we've got a climate crisis, and we've had deep cutbacks in the bus and train service in Metro St. Louis. And the question we're going to ask tonight is, can green transit help solve not only our transit cuts, but some of these other problems as well? We've got three very knowledgeable guests to help us understand that question. Let me introduce them to you. State Representative Rachel Stewart from the 64th District here in the city of St. Louis. Thanks for being with us again, Rachel.
Great to be here.
Nancy Cross from Service Employees Union Local 1. Thanks for being with us, Nancy.
Thank you for inviting me.
And then Talby Roach, who's a transit consultant and has worked for years in this whole transit area.
Yeah,
Thanks for being with us. And Talby, let me actually start with you. For our viewers maybe who aren't regular bus and train riders, can you give us a picture of how deep the recent cuts have been to mass transit here in Metro St. Louis?
Yeah, unfortunately, the cuts have been very significant. Metro had to cut nearly $36 million out of their annual budget in order to balance things out. Now the effect is several tiered, but primarily outside of the I-270 corridor, almost all transit service was eliminated from St. Louis County. Within the corridor, the effect to the daily transit rider is really in additional and longer frequencies. So as you wait for a train, the train is a lot fuller, there's a lot of standees, and especially on some of the major north-south routes like the Kings Highway in Hampton, some of those buses were indeed full to capacity and even leaving some passengers, especially during the more active commute times in the morning and afternoon. But one really unfortunate aspect of those cuts are that even the elimination of a few critical routes. One that comes to mind is the Shaw-Kirkwood, and Kirkwood being an inner ring suburb, and certainly there's a lot of folks there who benefit from transit ridership, and that line was cut altogether. So those folks were really discommoded, as we say in the industry, from service to the transit system.
And I imagine many of the folks using transit are your members, Nancy, you are service workers. What kind of impact is this having on your membership?
Our membership is largely relying on public transportation to get to and from their jobs. And unfortunately, the impact has been severe. More severe in some cases than others. We have a number of people that worked out in the Chesterfield area. They had full-time 8-hour-a-day jobs. They may have made between $9 and $11 an hour. Because they relied on public transportation and those lines were cut, both bus lines, they now had to request to either figure out alternative transportation or change jobs, which meant that sometimes they went back to working in the city in a part-time position at a less hourly rate in order to be able to get to work, to and from work. Those that stayed had to figure out friends that could drive, carpooling, or things of that nature. For the people in the city, a lot of the bus routes, as Talby was saying, have been cut, and as a result of that, it's taking our people, maybe it took an hour to get to work before, maybe it's an hour and a half now each way, or people took buses from the city out to Bridgeton to some of the industrial parks out there, and some of those routes have been cut, and they now have to come in earlier in order to make a bus to get to work in time, and then leave later. The bus routes used to go with the shifts, and now they're off schedule. And I think, if it's okay, I'll just say, I don't think people understand. Talby talks about the rush hour. There's a traditional rush hour, but it's not in like the old days. It's just between an hour or two. People come to work between 3 hours a day, 3-hour time frames, and also people more than one shift. So even when we had help from Chesterfield in helping with the services, it didn't hit everybody because not everybody goes to work at the time that they restored the buses, and that makes it more difficult. So we've had a lot of people lose hours, lose wages, or change positions as a result of this cut, including our people in the Southern Illinois side, because they might take Metrolink and then a bus but now the system doesn't work in a timely fashion to get them to work so that they're on time.
We've just heard two problems that have been created by these transit cuts. We took a baby step in the legislature this session to address that. Could you give us a sentence or two summary of what the Missouri legislature did?
Sure. Well, in the end, the General Assembly put $12 million into Metro to help restore some of these cuts that were made. But this was really a moving target. Metro, who actually, their staff was very effective this year in lobbying the General Assembly about this problem. They came to our Appropriations for Transportation Committee hearing and said that what they really needed was $35 million to be able to restore some of these cuts, to restore Call-A-Ride, to rehire the 500 transit workers who were laid off, to address some of the other deep cuts that had to be made. About 4 to 5 weeks before the end of session, it looked like the House Budget Committee was willing to put $20 million into this hole to help mitigate the situation, and we actually passed a bill out of committee that would have put $20 million in. Just a few days later, however, the Republican majority in the House reversed course, and they started talking about a $1 billion tax cut, and all of a sudden that number dropped from 20 to 12, and in the end 12 was the ceiling of what the General Assembly was willing to do in this legislative session. But it is important to keep this in context as well, because traditionally Missouri has lagged very, very far behind in funding public transit. And so, in contrast to the state of Illinois, which has funded Metro at about $20 million on average per year, the state of Missouri typically on average funds it at $1.4 million. So even at 12, this was about 10 times more than the state of Missouri has ever done in the past, but we're really just so far behind, and we had the opportunity this year with the stimulus funds to make a much larger investment, certainly to fund the entire $35 million, but there was just that same resistance to sending money to St. Louis, to putting it into public transit, and in the end 12 was all we could do.
Okay. Well, we're going to pick up this conversation. This is a great start. First, let's take a moment to see a message from our friends at Families USA, and then we'll be right back with you.